So this is a demonstration on how to sprue your piece, and technically what we're going to do is we're going to start with weighing, because in order to cast your piece that you've made a model of, you're going to have to weigh the rubber stopper that goes along with the flask. So I have my piece, and this actually looks like a sprue, but it's actually part of the piece. And I'd have to put these things together. So I'd put my model in here, and eventually I'm gonna put my flask over the top of it. But to start, I have to actually weigh the rubber stopper. So I've got a digital scale over here, and I'm gonna turn this so that you guys can see it. I always press the on button. And then I also have to press 0 to make sure that I'm zeroing out the scale so that the weight is accurate. So I can see right now, and actually right now I'm on ounces. Normally when I do this, I'm gonna just press, I'm gonna actually change it to grams. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to press 0 again. And I'm going to weigh this rubber stopper in grams. So I can see I have 128 grams of rubber stopper here that I need to keep an accurate count of. So I have to go write that down either in my sketchbook or on something that I'm going to be able to keep track of a calculation for my casting piece. So just so that you're aware, there's a couple different size flasks and rubber stoppers. And again, the metal part is the flask, the black thing is the rubber stopper. And you want to actually have it to the size of your piece. So I just weighed this larger rubber stopper because the piece that I have needs to fit inside this larger flask. But the piece that I'm going to demonstrate how to make sprues with is a lot smaller. So I don't want to waste all kinds of investment because the investment's quite expensive. And I'm going to make sure that I'm using the right size flask. So for this particular ring, if this was a piece that was actually finished, because if you really take a good look at this, this has not been formed. It doesn't have filing or sanding done on it, so I would not cast this. But just for purposes of this video, I'm going to at least make sprues on it so that you see the spruing process. So it's too small or it's too large for this small flask, so I'm going to set the small flask aside, and I'm going to take the medium-sized rubber stopper. One other thing that I want you to notice too about the rubber stoppers, there's a tiny hole inside this rubber stopper. The medium-sized one that I have is a little bit different. You can see the well in it is a lot larger. There's actually wax inside, melted inside this, which we do want to leave if at all possible. It's going to make doing the sprue a little bit easier for the next person, and hopefully it won't come out when we actually take the rubber stopper off after the investment's been done. So what I did is I took 2 of these red sprue wax wires, and I'm going to actually connect them onto my model that I have here. A lot of times you can probably just do 2 sprues, and so what I'm doing is I'm kind of trying to plan where I want to put this. I know that these wax wires are about 6 inches long, but I really only need probably about 1 inch. So I'm actually going to even just take my fingernail and pinch this off, and then I'm going to eventually melt this onto here. And I'm going to take 2 that are about that same size, and I'm going to stick with the same one that I was using before. I do want to actually have my model on a little bit of an angle, because what's going to happen is all of the investment's going to go completely around the whole model, and there shouldn't be any air bubbles, because if there's any air pockets in there, the metal is going to want to go where the air pocket is, and then your model won't look the same as what you actually carved. There'll be like a flaw on it. So the next thing that I need to do is I'm going to turn on, or light technically, my alcohol lamp, and then I'm going to just take 1 of these wax wires, and I like to get it kind of hot in the flame, and then I put it onto my piece. So I'll stick it on, and it's actually okay, it's actually going to stay, which is really nice. I'm just going to hold that one. I'm going to get this second one, and it's a lot smaller, so I have to be careful not to melt the wax on my fingers as much as possible. And I also have to really quickly flip this, so it's going to do that sort of like a teepee. If you, whoops, and I didn't sit there with my fingers long enough. It's kind of got like a teepee shape going on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the wax tools and I'm going to actually put it in the flame, and I'm going to just cut off the sprue where I don't need them connected. And then I'm going to pick off, ooh, and I just burned myself. So you do have to be really careful with the tools that you are getting hot, because I actually just touched my finger right there. It's not too bad because my reflexes are pretty fast, but you do want to be careful because you could technically burn yourself pretty good with these alcohol lamps. Another thing too is, so I'm just gonna hold the wax wire on or in the flame, and then as the wax is still liquid, I'm touching the connection between where I put my piece, and right here I can see this part right, and I'm going to use a different pointer so that you guys can see this a little bit better. But right here, I got to be careful not to put it in front of the flame or the whole thing's going to melt on me. This is a really nice side. When you actually make your sprues, you really want it to look like a tree trunk, how a tree trunk approaches the ground. This part right here, we don't want to have like any undercutting in here. So what I need to do is I'm going to take my tool and get it hot again. And then I'm just going to like really gently smooth that out. And so hopefully you see it's really smooth there, instead of being like that bulbous form that came off of a tree that has, like, you know, sometimes when trees get diseases, they have those weird bulbous things coming out of them. And then I need to do the same technique here on this other side, because if you look, what we want to do is create a way for the metal to flow right into the ring really, really fast, because the metal cools down as soon as you remove the heat from it. So we have to like get all of the metal through these sprues and into the ring as much as possible. And because this ring is a little bit larger, I would suggest at least a third sprue and maybe even a fourth, because of the size of this piece. If this piece was a lot smaller, 2 sprues might have been enough. But because, again, of how fast metal cools once the flame has been removed, I would put a third sprue here so that you're really shoving the metal as fast as possible to all parts of the ring. So I'm gonna, again, just heat up the wax wire, and I'm gonna put my third prong or my third sprue over on the side. I'm gonna take my heated tool and just let it melt through the wax wire. And sometimes, you know, you have to be really careful, because sometimes you could technically melt right through what you just did. And I don't know if you guys noticed that. You see how like sometimes the wax is dripping right off of my wire because I wasn't fast enough as I'm trying to, and you are going to have to like eventually clean the table off, because occasionally, like I can see I already, oops, and then I did it again. So I'm just adding more of this wax to make those tree trunk shaped sprues, so that, again, the metal has no obstacle from flowing from the button and where the base of the sprues are to the actual piece, because again, it's going to be something sort of like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make sure that this has a little bit more wax on it, and then I'm going to put my sprue on top of here. So I just took a piece of flat sheet wax and I kind of like folded it up into, you know, a shape here, and I'm going to add it to that sprue area. And then I'm actually going to take, I can see it's too big on the one side, so I'm going to heat up another tool and make sure that I'm cutting off any excess that I don't need. It's okay that I overfilled it. It's actually better to be overfilled than to be undercut the way that it was, because if it's undercut, your piece might not cast. And you'll see what I mean when we pull the rubber stopper off of the invested piece in a little while. So I'm just gonna, again, I'm gonna hold this in the flame and get it really nice and melted and liquidy, and I'm just gonna adhere this piece that I folded up onto my rubber stopper. And I do want to, I'm just gonna really, really gently – . 'Cause, 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 get this so that it's like more of a mound as opposed to, and I'm getting some of that wax. It was nice and soft. And so I was able to, I'm probably gonna have to like drip some more wax in there, but hopefully you can see it's a little bit more mounded over rather than undercut the way that it was before. So now I should actually weigh, and I'm gonna turn on my scale and get my weight of my piece, but now I forgot I have to actually turn it to grams, zero the scale, and then I need to take a weight. This rubber stopper happens to be 62 grams with the wax in it. This wax does not allow for the sprues, so you actually have to weigh the piece again once you get the sprues on. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to hold my piece kind of at an angle and make sure that, like, as I put this on here, I want to make sure that I'm not going to actually hit the sides with my flask. So I have to just kind of hold this, and I have to look from the top, and I want to make sure that my hair is not in front of the flame. But I'm just going to hold this piece here. I'm going to get another wax wire hot and get it melted. Another thing that you could do too, if it's too hard for you to use a wax wire like this and drip things on, you could potentially take some wax, and I'm just gonna put it on this, whoops, I'm gonna put it on the spatula, because that's technically what that type of tool is called. And if it melts off, I can just, you know, pick it back up, and I'm gonna melt it again. I have to hold this, and I gotta be careful. So there I've got, it's a little bit more melted there, and I have to be careful so that I don't accidentally knock my piece off. This is just very precariously attached right now. I have to do that same thing that I was doing to the bottom of the sprues that are connected to, oops, and there it fell over on me because I was trying to show you something and the wax wasn't completely solidified. So I'm doing that same technique that I was doing to the sprues where they attach to the model itself. And I'm just dabbing liquid wax around the bottom to create what sort of looks like a tree trunk, or where a tree trunk attaches to the earth. It gets fatter, and then you want a really straight, nice sprue without any kind of like let's say you take a hot tool and you accidentally make like a notch out of your sprue. You actually should start over, because any kind of indentation is gonna not allow for the metal to flow really fast, and then your piece might not cast, in which case you'll probably get really upset. So it's a really good idea to have really smooth looking sprues and a connection. So wherever the sprues are connected to either the sprue base itself, or this is technically called the button eventually when you have that in metal, but when you're attaching it to the rubber stopper, you want it nice and fat and smooth, and it should be nice and fat and smooth like a tree trunk attaching to your piece as well. And I always use the tree trunk as an example of what it should look like, because it does kind of look like that, and I think it's the easiest way for you to understand what your sprues should look like. So hopefully you can see mine has got that nice slope to it. There's actually one little spot that I should probably fix over on this side. I can see it's kind of sticking out kind of funny. So if I just take my tool and heat it up, I can try to smooth that out. I have pretty good hand skills because I've done this a long time, but you might want to, as a student, you might want to try to drip the wax on there, because if you try to take a hot tool, like I said before, you might accidentally cut into something, and then you're going to have to redo some parts. But that's just kind of making art, is sometimes we have to redo some pieces because, you know, it's all about learning hand skills and learning different techniques. Now that my piece is actually sprued, I need to go weigh it again. So I'm going to turn on my digital scale, press 0 up, and I pressed 0 before I put it on grams, so I have to put it on grams, press 0 again. And if we remember, before it was 62 grams and now it is 70 grams. So I'm gonna have to do some calculations before I can actually invest. But once I have my piece like this, I can actually put the flask back over the top. And then what I should be doing, and I do have to be careful because I have to peel this over the top. It's really important that you have at least a 1/2 inch between the top of where the flask is and your piece, so that the metal doesn't accidentally like break through the investment and then you end up with no piece, because all of the metal will go straight out the flask if you have this too close. So having this a 1/2 inch, and you can actually measure, I can see that mine's actually a whole inch underneath, which is even better. But it's not about the distance, because sometimes you have like a larger piece in here. You just want to make sure that you're at least a 1/2 inch from the top of the flask when you have your piece in there. The next thing that I want to do though is I need to put my name on here, because like literally these all look the same. So I'm going to take a piece of masking tape and put my name on the surface of this, and then I'm going to go and do my calculations. So I just took a piece of masking tape and I put my name on my flask. And now in preparing to get ready to invest, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of paper and I'm going to wrap it around my flask, and then I'm going to tape it. And this is like way too much. So what I'm going to do is get a scissors and I'm going to cut this down a little bit, because basically, the reason you do this is you actually want to over pour your piece a little bit, so that you make sure that the investment goes all the way to the top and then it's level off here as much as possible. A little bit over is even better, but you, again, do not want an undercut like that, because we had talked about how you have to have a 1/2 inch between your piece, or where the metal is going to be, and the top of this flask. So this paper prevents you from having that undercut in it. You could also potentially just take masking tape, which is what I did right now, and I'm going to just grab another larger piece just to go up one more time. And as I go on to the second level, you can see too, I have to be careful because I could accidentally crush the masking tape that was on underneath it. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm creating like an extra space for investment, and I don't want it to fill all the way to the top of this. I really just want to go just maybe a hair, a millimeter. You guys know what millimeters are now, because we have that millimeter ruler. You only need a tiny bit above the tape, or even with the metal, but we just want to make sure that it doesn't spill out. And I've got a really nice tight seal on here. I can't pull this out real readily. And I also have my name on my piece. Again, you could use paper, but if you want to do that, this piece would have been way too tall. So I would recommend cutting it down to probably like half of what this size is. So it's probably about 2 inches if you use paper instead. Before you sprue your piece, make sure you have hollowed out the model as much as possible so it's very light for the person who will wear it. Remember, the sprue should look like the curving that happens where a tree meets the ground. This will ensure the metal will flow to your model as fast as possible, helping guarantee the success of your cast. If you have a textural piece, you should really sprue it from an area that doesn't have texture, so you don't have additional cleanup work or repair when the piece is metal. Remember, it's much less time consuming to fix things when they are wax. The example you can see here shows a sprue that has been damaged and should be fixed before the piece is put in a mold or invested. It is also being sprued to the textural part because the person hollowed out the pendant and the investment needs to fill that space so metal doesn't fill it, making it heavy. There are other right and wrong ways to sprue, mostly having to do with how metal will or won't flow. Metal does not flow backwards, so you have to think about keeping the model going in one direction or put enough sprues on it so the metal travels to all parts of the piece at once. If you are confused, see your instructor for more tips on spruing. You also should end up with a button on the bottom when the casting process is complete. To do this, you have to calculate correctly. We will learn that next.